we can kind of prescribe like these milestones to these particular moments in the life, but what we really need to do is make sure that we relish every stage of that journey. Hi everyone, this is Kate from Moonflower Moments, and I'm here with Imogen from Sapling Tarot. I reached out to Imogen, who is an absolutely wonderful collaboration partner, because I wanted to talk about the different ways that the Fool's journey is very similar to our ages of development. So, for example, the way that we act at age 8 is associated with a lot of the themes that are happening in the Strength card. The way that we're acting at age 13 is associated with like a lot of our life's themes when we are 13 years old. And so I thought it would be a neat opportunity to collaborate with Imogen and really try to give you a new look into the Fool's journey as it is seen through our years of growth. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started with the Fool.
I'm happy to start with the Fool. So if we're being born, I can't remember exactly how you put it in the message to me, but it was just like basically straight out of vagina and into the world. And that's just like, that's how we're starting. And that's forever now how I'm going to imagine the Fool leaping off a cliff, straight into the world. And I mean, yeah, just like everything is that kind of fresh, brand newness. The deck that I work with all the time has the Little Mermaid, so it's that like part of the world suddenly becoming part of something rather than being, I don't know, you're like kind of inside and just suddenly you're experiencing everything, and that like so new babies that are so, I don't know, just like kind of crinkly and just everything happens so fast. And I suppose that like the speed element to it is something I hadn't considered with the Fool, of the amount of development that you go through in your first year versus your second, and you know, the amount that we develop over the course of a year now is like the speed of it is so extraordinary, and how much everything is changing, and like so you can only see in black and white. And I mean, that as a metaphor is kind of fascinating as well, of that like things feeling a bit more simple when you're that age, or like the Fool being that kind of a naive, innocent view of the world being more black and white and a bit more simple and high contrast and like good and bad and stuff. And yeah, it's just kind of an exciting thing, and it's such a fun thing to think about, like that real like fresh brand new. Because often when I read for people, I talk about the Fool because I'm reading for adults. I talk about how we are the Fool a number of times in our lives, like all the time. And so you're starting again, but it's with everything that you learned from the previous go-round, of all the way through all of the majors. So you've been through it once and now you have to go through it again, sorry. But so this is the idea of the very first Fool. Your first, you know, breath out into the world. And that's like, I don't know, it kind of gives me like shivers. The idea of like actual, that first, I mean, not physical step, but embarking out into the world.
It's definitely. I really am kind of ripping off the idea where you were talking about how quickly things happen between like that first year, you know, especially when you're not even like 1 year old yet. Everything is happening so quickly. So there's kind of an element of danger to that. I feel like the Fool is in like a very precarious position. You know, he's one step away from kind of annihilation, and not to bring it that dark that fast, but I do have Scorpio in my third house, so I'm always going there. I really do feel like at the end of the day, he is in a position of like danger. And so he still needs other people to kind of look after him. Still needs other people to watch him, because, you know, he is just kind of walking through life for that first time. So I think it's kind of a message as well. Like, you know, if you know of like a child that is that young, like your natural inclination is to just protect them. I think that the Fool, in a way, like, because it's so naive and it's like its first time walking through this world, like there is that element of danger in how we have to protect them as well.
Yeah, no, that's such a lovely, and you know, he has his little pal, doesn't he? Like these little, the decks I have, there's like this one dog and he's purple. But so he does have his little pal looking out for him, but I suppose it is so often, because they're drawn as adults, we miss that idea of wanting to protect. Because I also think about like innocence and naivety and stuff, and when I see that in people, I think as an adult, when you see that in people can kind of go one of two ways. Either you desperately want to protect that, or people see it and they want to tear it apart. And so like I think the Fool can maybe bring that up for some people, is that like that sort of aggression of like wanting to get, you know, this is the real world now, Sonny, kind of, you've got to see the reality of it. And then other people will be a bit more like, oh no, keep that. That's magic. You know, the idea that you adjust sort of, and we'll get into it as we sort of age up through the majors, but like that kind of throwing yourself into danger and having no concept that things can hurt or things can taste bad or that things can go wrong, and the idea of just wanting to hold that and be like, hold on to that for as long as you possibly can. Forever, please, preferably.
It's kind of like the dog could be a parent or an authority figure in that sense. And you are right that it can go one of two ways. Like some people are very bitter. So they're the types of dogs that like maybe perhaps have like a little bit more aggression in the sense of like, no, you have to kind of learn how to act like you're just starting out. Like those would be more like the stern parenting. But then you also have the dogs that are very like fierce and kind of protectors of their children. And then you also have the dogs that are like super loyal and super loving and giving. So I guess the dog could be that parent or that authority figure that's trying to help them through this precarious situation. And it all just kind of depends on how that dog or that parent figure views that innocence.
Yeah, and the idea that like dogs kind of sense danger and stuff, so like you might not see it, like the fool might not see that they're about to jump off a cliff, but the dog is being like, no, this way, don't go jumping off the cliff, that's dangerous, that's bad, like ruff, 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 ruff. Don't do it.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense to me. Oh my God, I love that so much.
Just like little protective little guy. I always used to talk about my, like, I don't have like, because of the autism, I don't have a great like body-brain connection. The conversations can get a bit laggy between my like awareness and my body, and I always used to talk about the signals I get from my body being like a dog barking at me saying that Timmy's fallen down a well. So it's like my body's just kind of going ruff, 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 and it's like I'm hungry, I need to go to the loo, whatever it is, but it's like a child's fallen down the well, and like my body is just like, oh God, it's really panicking, and I'm like, I don't know what you mean, I don't speak dog. But like, and so like again, that sort of the fool, the baby being like learning what these things mean for the first time and being like, I don't understand, but I'll try.
And being like a little shell shocked throughout it too. Yeah, you're right, because they are first into contact with like all of these external influences. So they don't know really how to take those cues of that animal, that dog that is barking to them. That makes sense to me.
Well, I'm glad, because I had some therapists be like, what do you mean? Who's Timmy? Where's the well? It makes sense.
Because I think it makes sense because, I mean, especially with the fool being an air card, right? Like the baby, the child does not have a direct sense of their body yet. And so they don't have necessarily, it's just pure air. You know, there's no earth to this element at all. So they don't have control over their like bodily functions yet. They don't have control over the urges that they feel like when they feel hunger, like they can't go and seek food themselves, right? Like all of it is just kind of like a thought, like, oh, I'm hungry, but like I can't really do anything with that because I'm not really connected to my body enough to go and like grab that food for myself.
Yeah, and that the distress that comes from that as well, of not being able to do things for yourself and being totally beholden to other people needing to express those needs. And there's like that kind of, there's like a confidence that we probably wish we could emulate of a baby being like, well, I'm going to cry because I need fed or I need to sleep or I need something else. And just like as adults, we're just like, well, I can't do that. I can't just like sit on the floor and burst into tears and someone will bring me a snack. I wish that was what happened.
It's kind of like nostalgia for helplessness in that way.
Yeah, which now that you say it like that sounds really wrong, but like just a little bit.
The human urge, like we all kind of want to go back.
Yeah.
So, The Magician?
Yeah.
Okay, so my mind went on fire when we started kind of chatting a little bit about the lovers, because you had brought in like the Gemini placements, which we'll get there in a little bit. But what I thought was really interesting about The Magician as like a 1-year-old is that's when kids start to become really aware of how to use objects in their environment, right? Like they're grasping onto a lot of things and they're starting to use things more purposefully. So that kind of immediately drew the connection with the magician to me, because the magician has all of these tools that are at his disposal. And so there's kind of a sense of they can differentiate themselves from objects, and then they can start to use objects more purposefully. I also thought it kind of goes into like they're learning fine motor skills at that point too, which is kind of similar to that using of those objects. But there's kind of like an increased sense of autonomy here. People start to, at like 1-year-old, they start to develop language. And I'm a big believer in the concept that like language drives our reality. So they start to have access to just like small words like mom, dad, things like that. But by gaining access to that language and starting to understand language, their worldview just kind of expands, which to me always feels very similar to the magician. Because I feel like when I get the magician, like everything is a possibility and anything can happen. But it's not quite as like reckless as like the fool when you're kind of sitting in this like, oh, everything's a possibility and anything can happen, but like I'm helpless. Like the magician has some power now because of their ability to speak and to start to make demands, right? Like to say like mom, like I want mom, or like blanket, I want blanket. Like they start to see all of these objects and start to want them and kind of relentlessly go for them in a way that is similar to the magician for me.
Yeah, and like being part of, so like you were saying about the fool being sort of pure air or something, it's like the magician is like it's part of the world now. It can interact with the world. It doesn't have to have other people kind of bringing things to the child all the time. Like they can actually start to kind of, they can start to grab, they can start to reach for things and to show what it is that they want. And yeah, that's such a cool thing of the idea, like the reaching for the tools and having these things kind of at their disposal. And the language thing is really fascinating because of like the Mercury element of the magician as well. And so that communication, and I've been down a big cognitive linguistics rabbit hole this year. And so the idea that our language like shapes our experience of the world, but also in the way that so your world explodes, but also you become very positioned within your culture, because the way that your culture and your like primary language, or the languages that you sort of swimming in when you're that age, that kind of, it starts to create the very bottom of that structure of how you're going to see the world. And it's like starts with those assumptions and things. So it's things like, so in the English language we have a lot of things around arguments and conflicts being things that you win or you lose, and there's a lot of kind of aggression in the terminology that we use, whereas there are some other languages where it's just more about like the flow and about the exchanging of ideas, and if that comes to higher volume and things are more passionate, that's like fine, but it's not a you leave the thing and there was a winner and there was a loser. And there's things about like how we conceptualize time, like the English language, it's very linear, whereas there are some languages where things are more cyclical or spiralic and stuff. And so we've got the magician, the world explodes with all of these possibilities, but also it's the very beginning of that framework that you're going to be working with or against for the rest of your life.
And the term that kind of comes to mind when you say this is like as above, so below, right? Because we're finally through our ability to like start to touch things and start to work with tools and like our very basic tenets of language. It's still like we're finally kind of connected to the below, right? Well, a little bit like the earth, not quite below, but like the earth itself in comparison to what it would be juxtaposed against, which would be like all of that air and all of that kind of like essence as being like a young child. So I think that really works in that domain as well. This is so much fun. It's so much to think about.
It's so cool. Like my brain is just like sparking
Buzzing.
on like the whole journey of it, and it's the micro and the macro of the majors, where it's like I've heard people try and define them as being like the big, you get like the big archetypal energies, and then the minors are the small everyday things. That I'm like, but the majors are also in all of the everyday things. They're in everything.
Totally. And you had mentioned Mercury as well. You had emphasized that pretty heavily. And I also thought about traveling with a magician because people start to get their first few sleeps.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of a neat correlation to where like the first time kind of Mercury pops up in the major arcana, it's the first time that we're really starting to get a sense of like traveling. Like I know one is still like a little kind of young, but like some, I think that some kids
still
will walk
moving around the space. You're still able to be mobile, and I suppose also, so you've got communication, you're learning to communicate, you're learning how to move around, and also the mischief. Like a 1-year-old, like you've got that kind of, they're really a whole person already at that point, and it's terrifying. Like I have a baby cousin who is, she'll be 1.5 now, but she's a full human being. Like she is not just a potato anymore. She is a full person, like with her own little personality and stuff. And so that kind of Mercury Hermes kind of mischief thing, along with the communication, that it's like that works. I think that's lovely.
I think it really kind of ties up pretty nicely. I'm
That's
interested
very
to hear
sweet.
your thoughts on the high priestess. The high priestess was the hardest one for me to do out of all of us.
Yeah, I think like the idea of the high priestess being a 2-year-old is kind of funny, but I think like that the learning how to, I suppose it's you having your own inner world. So when you're like, as much as we know, it's kind of hard to really have these sorts of conversations with 2-year-olds. But like when you're freshly born, it's all about like, I need food, I need comfort, I need sleep, I need, your very basic needs. As you get a little bit older, there's the inner world kind of, I think, starts to open up in terms of the way that you experience things and that you can have thoughts. And that way of, having developed language and stuff, you were able to, and I know that people experience this differently, and this is something that I find fascinating, is like, do you think in full sentences? Do you see pictures in your head? Do you hear words?
There's some more like idiosyncrasies with how we are developing our relationship with like perspective and then language. But like this is really kind of that framework in which we're doing like a lot of internal work in determining how we will process the world. Or not so much determining, but like just kind of falling into these patterns that we're already kind of predisposed to. Oh, that is so sick. I love that.
Yeah. But again, it's like those differences in the way that we process language and the way that they kind of settle into our consciousness, I think, and developing opinions. So having that sort of sense of the internal, I mean, fucking 1-year-olds have opinions.
Yeah.
Babies have opinions. Try giving them broccoli. But like, I think being able to figure out something a little bit closer to like, why? Why is that your favourite colour? And like asking why in general. Again, I mean, you were saying that you don't
Yeah.
spend an awful lot of time with like really young kids, but I mean that doesn't stop. You know enough. But
Yeah.
the whys, they start real early.
What a beautiful depiction though of like a 2-year-old asking those whys then, because like I feel like the high priestess is not someone who just has the meaning but also searches for those meanings as well, if only for herself, you know?
Yeah.
I wrote down instincts to coordinated actions. That really kind of brought some ideas to my mind because like I feel like the high priestess is very tuned to her instincts into that inner world, and I feel like the high priestess, when she chooses to act, the actions are very like deliberate, and I feel like we kind of start to get a sense of that at this age as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just flicking through the cards, and for the Tarot of the Divine, the deck that I use for professional readings, I love that. So this is Scheherazade from 1001 Arabian Nights. And so I love the idea of being two, and it's like you're starting to kind of conceptualize stories and narratives.
Beautiful.
And like that sense of, if you're like reading a story to a 2-year-old or something, they're getting more of a concept of sequencing, and this happened because of this. And again, it's the why thing of being able to figure those things out. And it's like the very early senses of like understanding motivations and like these sorts of what it is
Yeah.
to be human beyond being kind of a mammal, and those sort of more kind of icky tricky human things, and just starting to get a little bit of a sense of, God, there's more than just eating and drinking and sleeping and comfort, and that different things need different, and it's the very beginnings of that. No wonder they call it the terrible twos. Like, that's stressful as fuck.
I know, like you're speaking with like such reverence. I'm like, okay, maybe that's why I haven't traditionally understood the high priestess, because like it is such a kind of transitory state, even with being associated with like the moon. The moon goes through cycles, so it's kind of like a continual reminder of like we're going through a lot of different cycles at that moment. Things are starting to kind of amp up, but we're really kind of focusing on that inner world. Yeah, that makes sense.
But I love that of the stories and the starting to understand narrative, and also like the story of the 1001 Arabian Nights is that it's essentially like, so do you know the story?
Yes,
So
I do.
so it's it's a king that has had like many different wives, and they last a night, and then he kills them, but she tells these incredible stories, and so he keeps her alive so he can get, and that feels very like, just one more story, mummy, one more bedtime story.
Most
It's just
definitely.
a cute little additional, as someone
And
who
it
was a
even
babysitter a lot.
with the scroll, the scroll
Yeah,
presence.
just one more story, one more page. I'm still there. I'm that
Me.
forever of having to deal with my inner child, just being like, just one more page. Like, I'm tired.
Yeah, because I
to
mean,
bed.
stories influence our world. So I think it makes sense that that is the beginnings of that. I never would have made that connection. I love that. All right. So the Empress for me was much easier for me to understand, like significantly easier. I love the Empress in general. I think that's why I put for the Empress that I really feel like 3-year olds are very led by their sensory worlds. And so I think that that's kind of like the cap of this is that the Empress is so body present and so body driven. Like when you see 3-year olds, like you can really see them kind of going wherever their senses kind of lead them. Like, oh, that's a pretty color. So they're being like led by like visual. Oh, that tastes good. So like they're being led to like pick out like another piece of candy for the bowl. But it's very like sensory driven. I also kind of thought, and perhaps this is a little bit of a stretch, but like I remember when I was like 3 years old, I used to spend like a lot of time like in the world of like animism. Like I really did think that like inanimate objects had like feelings. Like I used to play with my toys like that all the time in a very like mothering way, which is very Empress. But I feel like the Empress kind of sees the entire world, even like inanimate objects, as like things that have life force, things that are like alive. Like it's very pulsing with life.
Mm.
And I think like 3-year olds kind of see that way too, because like they're seeking things out through their senses, but like also they're naming like their stuffed animals, and their stuffed animals have like names. And like we're starting to get to the point, it's not like fully developed yet, but we're starting to really get into that point where there's like a lot of imaginative play. And imagination is oftentimes associated with the Empress for me.
I love that, yeah, and because like I always think of the Empress and creativity, so as being essentially a synonym for fertility that has less baggage, for me personally.
Most definitely.
So yeah, that like, I mean, the kids are creative from younger than 3 for sure, but it's like oh yeah, I really like that. Sorry, I'm just like so yeah, the sensory being like sensory led in that kind of Venusian
Yeah.
like pleasure seeking kind of way, like tiny little hedonists. Like they're out here for a good time and they are really pissed off if you want to stop them. Like that's so sweet. I love that. Just these tiny
Which is very,
little empresses walking around. And yeah, that caring element as well of like the love of a 3-year-old, the affection of a 3-year-old. Like, I want to be emulating that in all of my relationships. Like, that sort of absolutely just kind of unencumbered and, yeah, just unconditional love and regard and affection and stuff for everything, for life, for all things.
very like
And
bright eyes. You know, everything is so beautiful and everything is so wonderful, and I love all of it.
until it's not, and until someone thwarts them, and then everything's terrible. And everything's awful. And I mean, they're just like tiny teenagers, but I love that. And yeah, the really kind of animistic worldview of caring for everything equally.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, that's huge. That's really big. The keyword on the embodied ecosystems is nurture. And so, because yeah, you see kids that age with little kind of baby dolls in prams and wanting to look after something like a pet or
Because
a younger sibling.
their world is so like mother driven and like mother centered that they really are just grasping that sense of mother. They're embodying that and showing those characteristics outside of themselves too. You know, they're just kind of leading, kind of letting their life be led by example, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they see that that's how they're being treated, and then there's that like kind of inner sense of fairness. So it's like that's how you should treat other people. This is how and so I want to do that.
I think that leads in like perfectly to the
Yeah.
emperor too. Because you had said like I feel like you had mentioned how they get really pissed off around this age. One thing I feel like the empress and the emperor like they're side by side. You know, it's difficult to differentiate. They're kind of side by side because like you have to have one with the other. But
Mm.
they get really pissed off when people take away their ability to do these various things. And I feel like that's very emperor esque in nature. Like this guy like kind of wants to like stake his claim at his domain. He really has a fair understanding of the way that the world works, but like don't fuck with his understanding of it. You know,
Yeah,
that's and like I want to be free to do all of these various things, and I feel like it is my right to do all of these
yeah,
various things. And so I think it bleeds over into that as well.
for sure. And then like also so here in the UK, but also for you over in the US, like 4 is the beginning of school. And
Yeah.
so I suppose if you've done like nursery or like preschool things, then you will have maybe had a flavour of like other structure being imposed. But school is like you're learning what real structure is, and it's is, I mean, I have opinions about the fact that we try and impose this much structure on humans in general, let alone children, around like, this is when you eat, this is when you go to the bathroom, this is when you do any of these things. But like, you're starting to understand it, but also the comfort that can be found in knowing the boundaries of something. And so
The boundary.
you can go like, okay, so for this 40-minute period, we are doing potato printing. And I know that by the end of this, I mean, I'm not saying that 4-year-olds necessarily have a concept of time exactly, but like for this section of time, and then we're going to wash up, and then we're going to go and we're going to have lunch. And it's that very like sequential thing that, but yeah, so it's just that thing of the comfort of knowing what's coming next. And so that slightly deeper understanding of the passage of time, and first we do this thing, then we do this thing, and that feels good. But again, woe betide anyone that fucks with them. Like, no, on Wednesdays we do this thing at this time, and you know, this is lunchtime, and maybe I'm still like this. But I think 4-year-olds, they've been handed, so like we were saying about the nurturing thing of they've been nurtured and so they want to nurture, they are now handed this structure, and then it's just like, so we all stick to this, yeah?
Yes, no, totally. I wrote that down on here about how like they like to boss other children around, but I think, but they do it through the lens, from what I've seen from like my nephews, they do it through the lens of like, well, that's not how we do that. Like we have lunch after we, like we can't play, we lunch, then we play. We don't play, then lunch. Like there is a very like sequential understanding to their thinking, but it makes sense because like what you had said earlier about like bodily urges, like if the kid stays in that area of like 3 years old, like they go pee whenever they feel like peeing, like they're at home, they have access to a bathroom. Now all of a sudden we're at school and there are a lot more like rigid systems that are put into place with the emperor, and so at the end of the day they have to essentially abide by those rigid systems. And there, I think there is some comfort into some of those systems, but it's also like quite like brutal. Really what I think of is like the empress is kind of like uninhibited like growth and like sensing of like sensory kind of seeking, whereas the emperor is like, no, this is how you exist within certain structures, within certain forms, and is really preparing kids, unfortunately, for like the kind of like factory line jobs that many of them will have, the way that schooling kind of is set up in the US.
Or again, and here as well, we have a couple of different like alternative education systems, but they're very much the minority and have their own issues. But yeah, that's primarily the thing, is we're teaching you how to ignore the fact that you have a body so that you can be a good little worker bee when you grow up. But then also the thing with the emperor of like fairness, and I think that like childhood, like small child idea of what's fair, and how like the tension in a child of something that is deemed unfair. Yeah, and that like full body, like that's not fair. Why did that happen? Someone needs to, because it's like it's a bodily. So say, and like again, I think about a lot of autistic adults that experience that, but it's like essentially a lot of the time we learn, you know, what the adult would say in that situation, which is life's not fair. Sometimes things happen that aren't fair and that you just kind of have to deal with it. But there can still be that bubbling feeling of just like white knuckle clenched teeth, that's not fair. And like that age feels like when that becomes real prominent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that leads really nicely into the Hierophant. Like, because I feel like the Emperor and the Hierophant are one and the same, but the Emperor is trying to teach us how to fit within civilizations. I feel like the Hierophant many times is trying to teach us how to fit within a higher order and kind of learn our place within those religious systems, within those educational systems. But I wrote down on my sheet that the Hierophant, I feel like the children are the acolytes that are down here at the bottom, and they are learning. They're learning through the filter of an authority figure, because oftentimes pre-K is optional in the US. So oftentimes kindergarten, which is what you start at 5, like that's mandatory in most places. So I feel like this is really like their first like hit with like, you know, we have all these rules in place, and we're going to feed you this conventional wisdom that we think that you need to know in order to be successful later on in school and later on in life. But there's kind of this sense of the person who is the authority figure. And I'm sounding bad about teachers, but I am a teacher. So it's just kind of like my critical thought.
It's different, isn't it? Like, I think being the teacher, like teachers in general, There's like obviously nothing wrong, and they're like some of the most important people in our society. The education system, however,
Correct.
that's
And
the
I think
distinction.
correct. So maybe perhaps the Hierophant in that case is less so about the teacher and more so about the education system. We'll neutralize it that way because I think that's actually more correct. So like the emperor could be like an actual figure, whereas the Hierophant is the representation of those systems that are placed upon that child that they kind of like have to kind of bend to, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that's a really like interesting perspective. I think on the Hierophant and that sort of the systems in play there, because one of the I've been showing mostly the Tarot of the Divine. So the Hierophant is more a card of like inherited wisdom. So it's like wisdom that, so if you've got like the pairing of the High Priestess and the Hierophant, the High Priestess being wisdom that comes from within, and the Hierophant being wisdom that comes from kind of without.
I love that.
But then like, I was thinking about like when you're 5 and maybe you start doing other activities. So maybe you join like a kids soccer club, or I started, I don't know, doing like kickboxing or like art club or after school club, and or you start learning from people. So you've been learning only from your family up until this point. You now have teachers, but then you also might have other people that you're learning from, and you're learning about being in community and all of the places that you get information from. And children are just sponges, like they're just taking it in all of the time, and as their world opens up more and more, they're taking in information from more and more places and figuring out, I mean, even at that very, very young age, like whose authority do we respect? So we respect the teacher. When I was that age, that was when I had like my sort of, so in England where I did, when I had my primary education, most primary schools are Church of England. There is a churchy element to them. And so that was my first real interactions with the church at that age, and figuring out, do I believe this? Is this something, because it wasn't at home, and so, but it was at school, and it was something that you just kind of had to go along with, and figuring out, so you've got your teacher, and you've got your parents, and you've got your, other authority figures in your culture, but you've also maybe got religious teachers, and figuring, and sort of within your family, you've got grandparents and other people, and they all have opinions.
Yes.
And it's like figuring out which of those you're taking on, who shouts the loudest, but also what kind of settles the most within you, and what do you let go of. For instance, for me, church. I think I was probably like 6 or 7 by the time I'd gone, no, I don't get it. But like that's fine. At 5, you're taking on more information from everywhere.
Yeah, you're starting to really consider those external viewpoints. And like I never would have made the connection of like starting other activities at the age 5, but I think that makes sense. Like that's the time in which we've kind of learned more social play, more collaborative and cooperative play. I think is like around 3 to like 5. So we're kind of in that point to where we can go like play soccer with someone, or we can go paint with someone, and because we're kind of sharing, and that in itself is very community oriented in the way that the Hierophant is like you have to look outside of yourself and know how to exist within these structures.
And for better for worse, like figuring out where you fit within these things. So yeah, you've done sort of gone from the Empress of I will fit wherever I decide to fit, and then the Emperor of being like starting to understand those shapes, and then the Hierophant of being like, okay, so where do I exist within the context of these shapes?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Do you want to take the Lovers? Because I feel you had a lot of very interesting viewpoints about the Lovers.
Yeah, I will always have stuff to say about the Lovers, because I do make being a Gemini my entire personality. But
and it's
it's relevant.
So many different layers to, which is, I mean, how Gemini is that there are so many different layers to the Gemini card.
Exactly, and it's like, it's just, I don't know, it's relevant to the kind of work I put out into the world, is that I'm a chatty bitch. But yeah, so the embodied ecosystems, a keyword is reciprocate, which I think is just delightful and gorgeous. But yeah, so the Lovers being like the Gemini card, the Mercury card, we haven't mentioned the Emperor being Aries and the Hierophant being Taurus, and I did mean to, but
yeah,
that we'd be here all day if we remember to put in like all the correspondences. But yeah, I think like what you were saying about the Hierophant being those like figuring out where you are within community, and that collaborative play and learning how to give and take and stuff. I think that really, by the time you get to the lovers, and this is where my child development is getting a bit sketchy, but it's like you're really starting to build relationships. It's like it's not people that you just play with because they're there. It's like, unfortunately, you've probably reached the age of like, these are my best friends, and you can't sit with me.
You
And
start to
like,
choose people.
yeah, and
Wow.
that's awkward. But like, I think that's where that's where those connections, like you start to have like your chosen people, and I mean, kids do that from a really young age, ask anyone with like multiple parents, and it's like kind of, oh, there will be a favourite parent and it will be really awkward. But like, it's, or siblings or any of those sorts of things, but I think particularly in school, people start kind of clumping and grouping, and so you have shared interests and you have ways of spending time together that are less just kind of you've all been thrown together, and more because your personalities are becoming more and more kind of individualized. There are people
Yeah.
that you start to gravitate towards and people that you don't gravitate towards, or essentially like your values. So it's like by that age it's like, oh, that kid's always like distracting the class or is always being really noisy or annoying and stuff, so maybe I don't want to associate with them. And like that is, you're really becoming little people because you start having in-group and out-group, and that is kind of scary, but like it's also part of growing up. And like I can't imagine being a teacher of that age group where it's like, oh god, they've just realised they can do this. That's real scary. Like I went to a really small, like, well, I suppose I went to a very small primary school. To my mind, my sister went to a school that had 30 kids in total across
Yeah.
like 6 age groups. So that was like, the whole primary school was 30 kids, which I
Wow.
cannot imagine. It was like 3 kids to a class. It was wild. But like my school was like under 100 kids for reception year 1, 2, 5 years. So like 20 kids to a class kind of thing. And we still managed to have like in-group, out-group friendship struggles and those sorts of the shifting and changing and stuff. And I think that's kind of a big deal. And those like, the decisions and the choices of the choosing people, like you say, that those, and that's like, I don't know, I'm having like full body memories of that age group and being like, oh god.
I mean, that's absolutely terrifying. Yeah, I took it for choosing people as well, but instead of it being friend groups, which it makes sense because with the lovers, like they're kind of peers, right? Like they're at the same age. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I took it from the Marseille perspective. So I wish that I had a card to show, but all I have is the RWS. But to have the man that is in the middle between two women, and one of the women looks a tad bit older than the other. So I kind of took it as like the perspective of like, okay, now I have these friends at school, so I'm kind of excited to leave mom behind. Like I'm choosing instead of like, because like sometimes people say that the Marseille is like two different women. I always kind of see it as like a mother and then like a potential lover. So to me, it's the concept of like, I'm choosing to kind of leave my mother behind, or a woman that is like older to engage more with like people that are my peers. And I felt like that really fit along with like 6, because now you're in like first grade, you're developing that nuanced sense of relationships. I mean, with this like card being like air, it totally makes sense that like your predominant concerns at age 6 would be like air thoughts, like it would be like trying to institute like frameworks into these relationships and like make decisions based off of these sudden truths that you found. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool observation of like when things have sort of maybe shifted to things being more about your friends and about your home life, and school being like more important than your home life. Because I think those first couple of years at school, depending on the school, can just sort of feel like an extension of kind of nursery schooling, where it's like, and home, and that kind of sort of nurturing, hopefully, environment of it's not like you're sitting down to do an hour of English and an hour of maths and an hour of science or something, and it's that sort of the first steps into it. But by 6, maybe things are starting to have more of a framework, and there's a sense of like importance. And I think by 6 you've started doing maybe some kind of like standardized tests and things, and so unfortunately you now also have a sense of where you are placed and where your peers are placed within a kind of hierarchy of like, so for those choices of like, again, the whole in-group, out-group thing of like the framework of sort of like the clever kids and the not so clever kids is like starting to crystallize, which will follow kids through their entire, of if they're like the good student or the bad student, that's kind of starting to happen. and deciding who you want to be within that.
I think I just learned so much about the Lover's card from this discussion. I think I know I'm going to continue learning, but I cannot wait to rewatch this and jot down everything you just said. It makes a lot more sense.
Well, it's yeah, it's like a really interesting card. I think it's probably one that I try harder with because I think it can come across as like a bit one note for some people, where it's just like lovers, relationship, sweet, and I'm just like, I refuse for any tarot card to be seen as one note, but particularly not my Gemini card. But also just this one of the Next World Tarot is like that idea of like self-love as well, and like caring for yourself, and that kind of, yeah, so it's the person giving themselves like more energy and the care that they need. And so yeah, that kind of the independence from home, and sort of it's like another embarking. It's always we're always embarking on something new, but it's like another step of that. It's like the becoming a person.
I think you're leading so beautifully into the Chariot, because this would be my birth card because I'm a Cancer. And so I am a little shaky on how this relates to the ages, hence why we're doing this at the collab, so we can rip off of each other. But I do really get frustrated when the Chariot is only kind of summarized by like willpower and determination and things like that, because to me, like, this is the first time in the tarot where you're by yourself. And I would argue that this is the only time in the tarot that we really see someone as their own self, because like it's like, I would say, well, other than the Fool, like the Fool and the Chariot, it's like you, but like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, I oftentimes kind of think of as like authority figures that are outside of you. And then with 6 being the Lovers, like you have another person. So 7 is the first time that I really see that you're kind of like embarking on a journey and you're going your own way. And so I definitely put for this one, at age 7, people have a more developed and realistic kind of like nuanced view of self. So through their experiences with different relationships and trying to place themselves into the relationship dynamic of the Lovers, when we get to 7, when we get to the Chariot, it's like, no, I know who I am. You know, I have a better sense of who I am and what I want. And I have both the resources and the capabilities to kind of seek that out. So that's what I came up with in particular for the Chariot.
I love that. Yeah, I think like I suppose we're reaching ages where I have memories that I can pin to ages now. And I think one of my like defining memories of being 7 is other people telling me who I was and me having quite an emphatic response that was incorrect. So like what I could manage, what I could do, like particularly I think so around like my capabilities of, you're 7, you can't do X. And so like other people having ideas about where you fit, and you having enough of a sense of self to be able to go, you're wrong, that's not who I am.
I think like age 7 too was really when like gender started to be like super emphasized in my family. So like my sister always was more of like a tomboy. I've always been like more of like a girly girl, if we want to go with like some of those more outdated like archaic like terms for it. But I remember like 7, me being like, I like to wear skirts, because like I really did. And it's kind of interesting to me that the Charioteer is kind of like wearing that armor. Because I think this is probably the time in which, because we start to make decisions about like our appearances and have like, I know that like younger children can be like, no, I don't want to wear that, I want to wear this, right? I do like know that like kids that are younger kind of like pick out their clothes, but I really feel like at age 7, that starts to become associated with that identity. Yeah, I want to wear this because I am this. And we only understand like who we are and what that identity is because we've had the experiences of relating to other people with the Lovers. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, and almost kind of like maybe perhaps using identity as like a shield in some way. Because like I remember like my brother trying to get me to like climb some stuff, and I was like terrified to climb it. And my sister, who's much older than us, like she climbed up like this series of rocks. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't climb rocks, I'm girly girl. Like, I don't know, like starting to like take on these concepts of like your self ideas, and then your ideas about yourselves are kind of influencing your actions moving forward. That's kind of what I'm thinking for that, if I can tie it to like a specific memory.
That's so interesting, because like one of my other like key memories of that is like it's the first time I ever got called a lesbian, and I did not know what that meant. And it was from a kid who had some significantly older brothers, I think. So it was language that he'd heard at home, but he did use it correctly given the context, because I was sitting on the lap of another girl and then I got lesbian. And so it wasn't just someone parroting a word that they'd heard and then misusing it. So, like, the context was technically correct. I didn't know what it meant. I had to go home and ask my mum what a wonderful childhood experience that is. It's just like two women who love each other. And I was like, cool, sick. Thanks, mum.
How gave you such a neutral like response?
Oh, my mum is so autistic. It's so funny. Just say it how it is. Absolutely say it how it is. There were no euphemisms in my house.
I love that.
I started asking about sex when I was about 4. I got the answers when I was 4. Wouldn't recommend it as a parenting technique, but also it was fine. But yeah, so there was a sense of that was, so you said gender, and then I thought like, yes, that was starting to be like the weight of these things. We weren't all equal so much anymore. Like, we already obviously would have been having the, from the clothes that people put on kids, where it's like, lady killer on a little boy, or kind of daddy's little princess or whatever. Like, we already would have been pickled in all of that. But I think as individuals starting to take that on in terms of what that means and our position in the world around like gender, and then also tangentially sexuality of can a little girl be a friend with a little boy, or will people be saying, is that your little boyfriend?
Yeah,
I'm saying that from a very young age, but like by the time you're at 7, people are starting to say that. Yeah, it's more of a weight.
Yeah, like you're literally taking on these identities that they have given you and wearing it as an armor, for better or for worse, because it is a weight. But at the same time, like knowing who we are gives us the opportunity, like the charioteer, I guess, to kind of navigate. Like I knew, like in my situations, because I knew like some basic tenets about myself. I had some basic facts about myself around this age. Like I knew I would like that, whereas I wouldn't like that,
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see like at age 7, some of those pieces of armor that we put on are things that have been given to us, but a lot of it we kind of come across intrinsically on our own at this point. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, for sure. And then also, like, I think learning how to protect ourselves. So armor in that sense as well. So, like, you start to learn maybe a little bit about self-censorship, and a little bit around like who you can say things to and who you can't. It's not that like brutal honesty of a very, very young child. You're starting to learn either how to get your own way by playing people off each other. Kids can do that from a very young age, but like learning who are safe people to say things to, and like what kind of armor you need. So like, okay, maybe I don't go into school and talk about this particular thing. That might be, you start to learn about embarrassment and about cringe and about that kind of the stuff that you need armor from, and that level of self-censorship. And the charioteer having that motivation and that drive, it can be the motivation and the drive to streamline, to kind of to fit in and to make things a bit easier for yourself by popping that armor on and keeping your soft squishy middle a little bit more protected.
You just described a cancer like nobody's business. Everything you said related to my soul.
It's got soft squishy middle inside the hardcore armor that some is chosen and some is given.
Correct.
So, like in this one, it's a sea turtle, so it's got like the hard shell and the soft fleshy underneath, which is really beautiful as well. And embark, which is a great word, I think, of that, the journey.
I love that. And I think it's a beautiful depiction because like who we are as a person, half of it is interpreted by other people and kind of inherited from other people, but half of it is intrinsically us too. And like there's no way to kind of separate that in a lot of ways. I think it's cool. I put for the strength card that there's a large emphasis on self-control at this time. That's the only line that I have written down. But I remember just being 8 years old, and there was such an emphasis both within family as well as the school system. You're old enough to where you're expected to play still, but you're not supposed to play loudly, right?
Yeah.
You are supposed to have this imagination, but you have to kind of keep it under control. And it's like this very fine balance of like, you're still a child at heart. You really kind of miss that reckless playing that you used to engage in. But at the same time, people are telling you constantly, like, have self-control, be measured in your approach, and things like that. So I took it from that direction, because that tends to be how I see the strength card. But I think I have a pretty idiosyncratic like definition of strength in general. So I would like to know kind of where you went with that one.
No, definitely. I think that's it. And it's that, I suppose, again, like following on from what we were talking about with the chariot, of that kind of the shell and the squishy underneath, is learning about the interplay between those two, and about whether it...
I love that.
because there's the performance element of the Leo thing, of the learning how to do that and how to be something other than yourself, which can be great and can be harmful. Like, it can be, it's what we do when we go into job interviews, it's what we do when we go on a first date or something. It's best foot forward. That's what we learn how to do, and that it's not inauthentic, but it is different. It's not like our whole, we're not just immediately turning up heart on sleeves all the time. And so, yeah, that kind of self-control and learning how to kind of measure out how much we put into our situations. I think I think just that phrase, "you're old enough now," and like the amount of times that was used as kind of a squashing, or like, you're too old for this now, that you need to,
like, squashing down that lion. That lion wants to go and play, and the lion wants to roar, and the lion wants to take up room, right? We just came from the chariot. We just came from the most egocentric card in the deck. We want to take in room, but we have this kind of human civilization, which would be represented by that human saying, "No, squash that down. Like, you can't just give into your basal instincts all the time."
Yeah, and isn't that just the way with like so many of these things? It's like, and this is when it started to continue forever. Things
Like,
that we still have to
you're
do
saddled
today.
with this role for the rest of your life. You can't end the play until you die. Like, you constantly have to walk that fine line. It's a liminal space in that way.
For sure. And, the script might change and you might shift characters within the thing, but there's still going to be that essence of kind of performance and
So fucking
managing the those instinctive, kind of very kind of animal needs with the needs of the collective or the particular situation and stuff. And it's learning how to balance that is really hard. It's a conversation that comes up a lot in autistic conversations, because it's about the idea of masking, and so that you seem normal, you seem functional, you seem like a regular person, but like behind closed doors you're like fucking panicking. And it's, people will talk about how that is bad across the board. It's just terrible to do that, and I'm like, no, it's not. It is a skill. It's a survival mechanism.
It's self-preservation in many ways.
If we couldn't do that, there are autistic people that cannot mask, and they are the most in danger from, powers that be and people being unkind as like the lowest level of harm, to, terrible things happening to people that can't put on some sort of show to perform normativity. So it's like it's a and it can hurt if you have to do it all the time, but it's like, it's still, like you say, self-preservation. It's, that lion cannot always be out of the cage, because that gets dangerous real fast. And I think 8 is you're starting to have that friction, I think, from expectations, and maybe you want to be how you were when you were younger, but also you maybe are starting to reach that age where you wish you were older and you wish that people gave you more credit for stuff. And it's that like tension of being like, oh, I want to be the refined grown up, but also I just want to like go and like play in the mud.
Most definitely. Wow, that was a very, I hate the strength card because I don't understand it, and I should not say that. Instead, I should use that for fuel to understand it deeper. But the entire time you were talking, I was taking notes with it, because I've never made that association between like the strength card and masking. But I think that is the most beautiful analogy someone could ever possibly make. And especially at that age, having to learn how to do that for your own like safety. Yeah.
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 It wasn't all going to be fun talking about like being a kid and like the things that we learn in that journey and stuff. If we keep it kind of whimsical and archetypal and storyteller-ish, then we can keep it light. But if you're talking about actually kind of growing up, then there's a lot of weird grief that pops up in growing up, I think, in the things that you have to leave behind and the expectations that are put on you. It's a tough one.
Most definitely. I think that leads into the introspective nature of the hermit too.
Absolutely.
Because once you learn that you have to mask, once you learn that you have to balance that need to be authentic, which I consider it to be like the lion, the more base self, with like society's like expectations. Once you learn that you have to perform, I think that makes you incredibly introspective about, why the fuck do I have to perform? Like, why am I doing this? What makes sense to me? And I think that through that grief, we learn to separate ourselves. So that way we can take a little bit more time to develop that inner compass. and go from there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think on a personal level, I think 9 was probably the age where I started to kind of retreat into myself a bit more. And that is actually the key word that was chosen for the embodied ecosystems. And I think that that was where, yeah, like I disappeared into books quite profoundly at that age, I think, and kind of into like fantastical worlds. And I think I didn't, yeah, I didn't really know how to do the stuff from the strength card yet. And so I just kind of removed myself, like that friction of growing up and kind of the grief of, I remember like being about that age and being like, I think it was like one of the only times I was ever like punished in primary school, and it was because I'd coloured in some people like unnatural colours, so I'd coloured them in like green and purple and stuff.
That makes
But
me
I was
very
at that age where like they decided that that was wrong. I needed to be colouring them in people colours, and
yeah.
I think also I was punished because they thought I was like showing off for a boy. And they
Yeah.
were like, you're better than this, Imogen, you're better than this. And so I respect that bit, but also let a child be a child, like let them just colouring and
Yeah.
like just do what they, if the idea is that they're just kind of like killing time. I finished the worksheet, I was then allowed to colour it in. Like, why does it matter what colour the people are? And I think I just didn't understand. And so I just went like,
Yeah.
I don't want to touch anything. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, totally. Well, it makes sense because if the strength card is kind of like us being like under the thumb of expectations of kind of the weight of being a human in a world that does not honor humanity, it makes sense that the hermit, we want to, at the age of 9, kind of go back within ourselves and say, ouch, that kind of fucking hurts. Like that masking, that performance, like all of that kind of fucking hurts. Like I would like to know for myself what matters. I think for me personally, usually by age 9, I think many people have probably gone through at least like one or two very serious things. So like for me, like I experienced like the death of my grandmother at like age 8. And so I think my age 9 is kind of shaped by like the heaviness of that experience. But I think we start to get a deeper understanding of like death at this point. I think we get to get a deeper understanding of like where we kind of fit in within some of these more like esoteric thing. I think also too, one of the things that is really good about this age is that I started to get really curious about subjects that interested me. Like really, really curious. So part of my introspection, because I used to read so much too, I would say at age 9, I was the most prolific reader. I wish I could go back. I would read all the time.
Oh God, yeah.
So I started to get really into subjects. And so I think there was kind of like that specialization that I really tend to associate very much with like my rising. If I can bring that up, like I feel like Virgo risings are very good at specializing and kind of like nitpicking and just Virgos in general. So I started to see a lot more of those positive attributes of myself at that time too. I became a lot more studious, I think.
Yeah, I always think of Virgo as being a lot about like refinement.
Yeah.
And yeah, that kind of honing in on stuff and the kind of the slightly kind of detail oriented thing, which, you know, in pop astrology gets like a bad rap for being, you know,
Picky.
retentive and whatever. Yeah, picky.
Critical.
And it's just like but I think yeah, what you said about like I started to kind of realize what I was passionate about, I suppose, at that age, and like the things that I was interested in at that age I'm still interested in.
Me too.
And that's a really cool thing to think about. Yeah, that was like when I first started thinking about like what did I want to do like as a job, like, or as a career or something that was based on like my passions and stuff, and that's
Things
such
that
a
were
cool thing to.
intrinsically very you. Yeah, like intrinsically very you before you've been like schooled that no, you can't be an artist because your art is shit. You know, it's like you're still holding on to those like dreams and ideas that are still very intrinsically you before you've been conditioned out of them. Kind of like the specialty area kind of being like a lantern. You know, I think
Yeah.
that 9-year-olds have a lot more shit going on than what people realize.
Oh my god, yeah. No, you know, I had the same thing about like, you know, wanting to be an artist or a creator or something, but it wasn't even that anyone told me my art was shit. They just said, well, it's very competitive.
Yeah,
And
right.
like you're not. So it wasn't even that my art was bad. I don't think anyone knew like if my art was good or bad because I was 9. But it was just like it's just very competitive. So, you know, do something. And I think by that age I'd already been sort of, you know, categorized as kind of intellectually able, and so it was just like, well, then you should do something academic, you should do something, and lol, look where that got me. But like, it's, it was things like you should go into law, you should have fucking 9 people telling me like, oh yeah, you should be a barrister, you should be this, you should have the funny little wig, and me being like, I don't know what that is, I'm 9.
And I think Wheel of Fortune, I think this was the simplest thing for me. It's puberty. That's all it is. And there's not a single, I mean, you have like, the iconography and the margins, but like this is literally the symbolic representation of puberty. Like the shit is out of your control. You can't fucking stop it. You can't fucking change it. Things are happening way too fucking fast, and you better learn how to fucking roll with it because that's all you can do.
God. Yeah, that's ouch. Yeah, for sure. That's, yeah, because I think of, so the Wheel of Fortune is my birth card if you do the numerological maths thing, and I always think of it as the shit happens card. But yeah, I mean, if puberty isn't just the biggest shit happens of them all, but yeah, like I think 10.
I mean, you're 10, you're double digits.
Yeah, and that was weirdly, that was made a big thing in my family, was like double digits, and I was like, okay.
That's my golden birthday too. So because my birthday should be the 10th. So I just remember it being like this massive, huge thing of like, okay, we have hit this turning point. You are double digits. And then like intrinsically, there were a lot of things that started happening with puberty on my end too. So I think it makes sense developmentally as that.
Yeah, because I suppose you're approaching the pure chaos that is like, you're not quite a teenager, but you're approaching that like level of chaos of like things are going to have started happening. I think I'd already started wearing a bra by that age, which was no fun.
Me too.
And so then you've got all of those things of identity and gender and the expectations that come with all of that are starting to be given to you, and it's all just a fucking whirlwind of, oof, yeah, what an age. What an age.
Yeah.
You could not pay me to go back.
In US schools too, that is also like 5th grade, which is on the cusp of going into 6th grade, which is middle school. So it's also kind of on that cusp of like, okay, I'm at like the lowest school possible. Now I'm at the middle school. So I thought that was kind of developmentally appropriate too, that is seen from like a US centric lens, because it's like, all right, now I'm moving on. I'm aging as I go.
Yeah. So I went to I went to school in an odd county that had middle schools. That's not the norm for Britain. And so I changed school when I was 9 and then went to school. Well, I would have then gone on to go to a school for 4 years and then got on to, it was called college. So just to confuse things, it was a college at that age. But I actually then moved to Ireland to go to a secondary school there and then moved back. And it was a whole thing. But so I had that transition period at the age of 9, and that feels right for me in the hermit of being like, fuck, gone from being big fish in a small pond to being a tiny fish in a much, much bigger pond. So like, if my school had 100 kids for a primary school, it was now like 1,100 kids, 1,200 kids. It was so much bigger, and I had no comprehension of any of it. And so yeah, like 10, I probably just about got some sort of concept of being in the much bigger school, but then the youngest year group got kind of sequestered in its own space. By age 10, you were in the big school. You were in the big school building. You didn't get your separate little building anymore. You were in it, and the expectations were there for you to be, I mean, essentially like a teenager, even though you weren't there yet, but it was, the expectation was that you were, that was how it was going to be, and that was a big thing. That was my first ever I'm not angry, I'm disappointed thing with teachers, and that painful experience of like, oh god, there's so much happening and I'm part of this factory.
And that's interesting because I oftentimes, right, because like the Wheel of Fortune kind of plays on the concept of like fate versus free will. So like I read in one book one time, I don't know when it was, but the concept of like, if you're kind of sitting right here in the middle, you have more free will because you're able to like see what's going on. Like you're at the middle, like the wood part that doesn't move. Whereas like if you're here, like on the outside, you're kind of like rolling around and like you have no control. So I think that probably is the time period too in which we start contemplating like some of those concepts of like what is fate versus free will, because like I grew up Catholic, and we would go to CCD or Catholicism, and like that was around the age where they started talking about fate versus free will too.
Wow, that's real big for like
very big
kids. That's intense. Like, I think it's fair enough if you're coming up with it by yourself and like the concept of choice and do I get to choose what I do? And so by that age, we hadn't started like choosing subjects yet or anything. So you did what you did. Like, you did all the subjects. That was just like what was normal.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a really interesting thing about being in the middle of the thing and watching, being more aware of the path that you're on, I suppose, but you're still quite a long way away from any of the forks in the road. And
Totally.
when you actually get to make active decisions and things, you're just having to kind of chug along and do the things that you have to do at that age, which is mad when you think about it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I have a lot of respect for people that work with younger people because, I mean, like I work with ages 14 through 17, well, 14 through 18, which will come up once we get into those cards. Uh, Everyone always recognizes the big changes that are happening in them. I don't think that we recognize the big changes that are happening in like kids that are younger than 10, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
All right,
and
Jeff.
like those are huge changes and like they're happening so quickly. Like you can barely get your feet underneath you and then the next thing's happening and it's just damn.
I think that's
Being a kid is wonderful and it sucks. So 11 for justice, that is. I mean, we've already talked a little bit about like concepts of fairness.
I think it's like interesting because I oftentimes I actually switch 8 and 11 most of the time. I do, for the sake of this conversation, because I had an RWS out, I did do strength as 8 and then justice as 11. But I think that either way it could work. But I did kind of look up like Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development for number 11 because like there's basically 3 levels. There's the pre-conventional, there's conventional, and then there's post-conventional. So conventional morality is basically like this is right because it is the law. You know, this is wrong because it's against the law. Things like that. It's just very like social conventions, and we've all kind of like agreed that this is what is the case. And I think that like I really do take justice from like a very literal standpoint because I very rarely get it. Actually, as a matter of fact, because I keep track of my card pulls, the only time that I have received the justice card this year, point blank period, was the day that I got a speeding ticket in the mail. So like the only day, and I was like, what the fuck does this card mean? And then I went to the mailbox and there was a speeding ticket. So I definitely was speeding. I shouldn't have it. But that being said, usually like people are really attached at age 11 to that conventional morality of like it is right because these are the laws that we have to follow and this is what we have agreed upon as a system or as a unit, a collective unit.
They have kind of like the interplay between you and those rules and the understanding of like if you want other people to play by those rules then you kind of have to play by those rules, and that like the sense of the social contract and stuff. Like I, as an adult and unfortunately also as a child, don't really subscribe to, what did you call it, conventional morality of just because something's illegal means it's wrong or just because something's legal means it's right. No.
You probably have landed for a while at post conventionality, which when I was taught about this theory when I was in school, I was actually told by the teacher that most of the time people don't ever reach post conventionality. Like a lot of times people really do see the world in that black or white, it is right or it is wrong. But post conventionality is a concept of like understanding that there are systems at play and that, law does not equal ethics. But I think that for people that are neurodivergent, sometimes some of those thoughts, or even just people that have had like specific life experiences that are neurotypical, they probably have a deeper, more nuanced understanding of that conventionality. But I think that in general, at age 11, most people are really sticking to the concept of like, this is right because it's the way we're supposed to, or this is wrong. It's illegal or it's against the rules.
Yeah, or you're being taught that as well. So even if you don't kind of naturally, kind of instinctively feel that way, you're being taught that that is the way that the world works.
So it's an interesting thing that most of the systems that are at play are based into rules that at times can seem like a little bit arbitrary, but like at age 11 really is that time where we're working within that. And I think that in general, most people accept those rules as kind of the rules at that time, though as like social awareness kind of collectively grows, I think that like we're starting to question those rules like younger and younger, but
Yeah, and I think that there's that sense of like the distinction between following the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, those moments of questioning, I suppose, as well, that come into of like what are these rules and do we subscribe to them, and those sorts of like bits of like the youthful rebellion, but then also, yeah, the wanting to follow the rules because that makes everything simpler.
Yeah, and I think like you're right in the concept of like pushing, like this is probably the age too where people come into that understanding of why we follow the rules.
Mm.
That makes a lot of sense to me
Yeah,
because
and
we follow
wanting
the
to know
rules.
why, and because I said so is not a good enough reason.
I think that you're right because like all of that is part of the basis of that social contract. That makes sense.
Yeah, so like you said, wearing your like lanyard with your ID on it, we understand why we need the people on campus to be the correct people. Like, it's not
Correct.
just random folk just wandering around. And we need to be able to know, fire drill or whatever. We need to know where you are because you are a child and you are our responsibility and stuff. But like the socks you wear, why
Doesn't
does
fucking
that?
matter.
Yeah, why does that matter? Like,
Hangsman? The Hangsman was the one that inspired my thought for this video because I just think it is the perfect depiction of being stuck between childhood and adolescence. And you're literally just fucking stuck. Like sometimes you're getting invited to like the adults table, sometimes you're still like getting like regulated to the kids table. You don't really fit in within one world, but you don't really fit in into another. Through that kind of growing understanding, your perspective has just completely been flipped on its head. And like there's literally nothing that you can do except for wait out. And it's just a period of waiting. Like 12 years old, pre-adolescence or being a pre-teenager, it's like you're stuck waiting until you've hit puberty enough to where you're presenting as older. You hit that magical age of like 13, which is when everyone considers you to be like an adolescent. You're just stuck here. And through that stuckness, like I think that you exist in that liminal space and you're able to see things from like multiple, you're not quite in one world, but you're not quite in another.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think of it's not the Marseille that, so it's like the traitor. So it's like the person, so it's like feeling kind of like a traitor to your inner child and to the adult that you want to be, and just feeling like just wrong in both directions at that age, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It's the age of the awkwardness.
Yeah. No, that was the age when I like moved school to go to schools in a different country. And yeah, awkwardness.
And like
No.
physically, I think physically it's weird too because like so the youngest that I've ever taught was like 12-year-olds because I taught 8th grade for like one grading period. I will never do it again. Like shout out to people that teach 12-year-olds. That age is fucking crazy. But it was so weird because like some of my kids would come in and they would be, I'm only like 5'1", so I'm relatively short. But like the kids would come in and they would be like 6 feet fucking tall, but they
Yeah.
would still have a child's voice. And so it's that interplaying of like your physical characteristics as well. Like you look like a grown child, but like you still like are marveling over like Diary of the Wimpy Kid, which is like a famous book series here, and like you're still speaking with like a prepubescent voice. And so it's like what world do you actually fit in? Like you're just stuck there in the middle and you can't do shit about it. And it's like you just have to like surrender, which is a word that I think of a lot with like the Hangbang. You kind of have to surrender to those changes. Oh, is that the one that's there?
Yeah. Yeah,
I really like that.
absolutely.
I really like that deck.
It's so good. Yeah, I won't shut up about it. But I think surrendering to it is, I mean, you can't. I don't think it's possible at that age to be able to kind of go gentle into that good adolescence or whatever. Like, you will just claw at it. Like, it's just nothing feels good. Like that. So, like, the surrendering is real tough. But yeah.
That is so. You just made an allusion to like go gentle into the good night, right?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. Sorry.
It's totally the precursor to the card. I see exactly what you were doing.
That was not on purpose. I wish I could say that was on purpose, but no.
No, but your brain was on something. I knew where it was going. That said, going gentle into
Rage against the dying of the light and all that.
the death card.
Exactly.
I mean, from a quite literal perspective, all of a sudden at 13 years old, like we're a teenager, like that means something, right? Like people place so much emphasis on being like the age of 13. And it's like, I think we start to realize at that time, like our childhood in some way, shape, or form has died. And like there are things that we used to engage with and things that we used to do, but now we have all of those crippling responsibilities of, hey, you're growing up now and you have to figure out your purpose. You have to figure out where everything is aligned. And I think that's what the death card is. Because I mean, going from 12 to 13 is, I think, the ultimate transition. At this point, you've probably hit enough of puberty to where like you really are presenting mostly as an adult. I don't know. It's death of self. It's death of childhood self. It's fucking sad.
It is. It really is. And I think because you don't realise at that age,
You don't.
no one tells you, like, it's not, you'll never get your childhood back, but the things that you are grieving now, you can actually come back to. And I think that that has been like a lot of my like late 20s into my 30s is like reclaiming those childish things that I put away. Like, is, and finding new ways to interact with them and these things that like you really get told in no uncertain terms that you have to like put away at that age, and the doors that are just slammed on you at that age of like, no, you're no longer a child, into like being an adult and like reclaiming. And that's the thing of like, you know, the fool's journey of it being this cyclical thing is you do get to revisit it, but no one would tell you, and also I don't think you'd believe them. You'd be like, no, I don't ever want anything to do with that, like, you know, fucking Disney character backpack or whatever the thing is. Like, I'll never want to touch any of that ever again. And then a mere 10 years later, you're like, I love it.
Correct. Like, I remember going through this big decluttering phase at that age and like throwing a ton of shit away because I was like, I'm never going to want this baby doll again. I'm never going to want this Barbie doll. And a large part of my journey in my late 20s as well has been that reclamation of that child self. But at age 13, it just feels so fucking final. Like, everything feels so final. Like, I am no longer a child. And you get very angry about it. You'll say things like, no, I don't want that anymore. Like, I'm no longer a kid. Don't treat me like a kid. You know, I'm almost an adult. Like, no, you're not. You're 13. But like, yeah, you know, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different perspective on that side of things because I was kind of quite adultified at that age, so I didn't have as much of that, like, don't treat me like a kid, because I think actually
you were,
if you'd really like sat me down, I probably, if I'd had the vocabulary for it, I probably would have been like, no, do. I am still a child, please. Like, I do, like, I'd been so put into the position of having to be an adult despite not having any of the cognitive faculties to do so, that I think probably I desperately wanted to still be a child. And so the fact that it felt like that was all so far behind me now already was like, that's where the grief of the like the death thing comes in for me, because it was like, oh, that's just gone. You're never getting that back. You didn't really get enough of it to begin with, and you're never getting that back. And so like that, I think I did have a bit of that kind of friction of like, don't treat me like a child, when it was things like, you're already treating me like an adult, can you at least kind of respect me like an adult? So it was like, I've given all the responsibility and none of the respect. But like, so there was that, but the actual kind of like, I'm not a kid, don't treat me like a kid, I think there was actually like quite a bit of like, no, please do, I'm still only small. I mean, I'm the same size as I was when I was 13 now. Like, my physicality hasn't changed an awful lot since then, but it was a tricky time. I think like at that age I've talked about how it's like there was like a tiny version of me that lived somewhere in my chest, and now I actually, like, despite the fact that my body is roughly the same size, it's like I actually feel myself out to my edges now, whereas I just lived in here, this tiny little person barely living in their body, like, and so it's just like I actually exist in the world now in a way that I didn't then. But yeah, it's a fucking, what a time.
I relate to it so much. I relate to that so much. Oof. But it kind of goes into, like, because we've said like finality, we've said grief. Definitely, the death card definitely is the most like in your face, distinctive changing period. And I think for whatever reason, like, speaking from like American culture, what it sounds like yours as well, like it feels like there's so much like symbolic reverence of that age.
Yeah, big time. Yeah,
my favorite card ever in the whole thing. I love Temperance. I think that this is really informed by my understanding of the school system in America, because when we go from like 13 to 14 means you go from middle school to high school. So you are now the youngest grade that is on campus, but you kind of feel like you're a big dog, right? Like all of a sudden you're associated with like the grown people. And I think that Temperance, there's kind of that moment to where like at age 13, like you're still in 8th grade. So like you've experienced like all of this heavy shit as being like a young adult, but you haven't fully gotten recognized for it because you're not in with the big kids yet. You're not going to that school. And so I think that there is a moment when you hit that age of 14 where you're able to kind of take a second and like breathe and be like, no, like I am here, what is going on with me is valid. Like I am becoming a young adult. And so there's healing and there's kind of calm after like leaving behind like the tumultuousness of like childhood. I think it's like a really transitional period too, because like my favorite part about temperance is that there's one foot on land and there's one foot in water.
Yeah, I
So
love that.
me too. It's my favorite part. And so I think that like you are still grounded to the ground, but at the same time, like you kind of know who you are with like your foot in the ground, but you also have like an idea of like who you are within your community. And I always see water as kind of like a community. It's like other people. I also think like the irises, because so these are yellow flag irises, which are native to like France. And I think all the time about how like irises bloom early in the spring. So like 14 is kind of like the spring of your like adolescence. Yeah.
That's
Okay. So
lovely.
sorry, I could wax poetic forever about temperance. Like it is my
No,
favorite.
that's beautiful.
I feel like it's so misunderstood. Oh, and then Sagittarius too. Like it's associated with Sagittarius.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many lovely things that you can draw on. Like that Sagittarius, like the sort of the travel and the philosophy elements of Sagittarius and that kind of explorer thing. Like that feels like a lovely age for that to be, because you are able to be a bit more independent by that age. Like I was definitely allowed to like go out by myself, and I mean, my mum won't watch this, so it's fine. I was definitely out like drinking and having like parties at people's like houses when their parents were away, and may or may not have had like boyfriends and whatnot at that age. So in terms of that like Sagittarian energy of the temperance, like that was
You started a little younger than me because I would have saved that probably for like 15 for the devil. But I don't mean that in a bad thing by any means. I don't mean that in a bad thing by any means. I think one's judgmental.
No, I didn't take it as that at all. I mean, I look back on it and I'm just like, you're a wee bit young, Imogen, come on.
You were the older sibling, you know, and I was the baby.
I was, yeah.
So I think that comes down to like dynamics as well of like, you know, you were always treated as older, so therefore you had the opportunity to act like that, whereas I was always treated more as an infant. But yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just that kind of like that sort of striking out on your own, trying to find your own way to do things. I think essentially it was like my very low-key version of kind of rebellion at that age was just like, oh god, you've given me like so much shit to contend with, like I'm just going to go out and have some fun, I guess. At that age was sort of, that was when that kind of started for me. Yeah. And I think that probably gives you an idea of like the kind of area I grew up in, that's really quite young. But it's like, yeah, it's but yeah, I think that temperance of like 1 foot on land, 1 foot in water, of that idea of being like, so if the earth is like your body and the water is like emotions and stuff, of that being sort of the focus, I suppose, maybe. And then also like the Sagittarius bringing like the fire. I'd say there's a notable absence of air going on, of like, are you engaging your brain at that age, or are you just following the passions and the body and the emotions and stuff, and are they the things that are maybe ruling the show for a moment?
Correct. And I think we kind of end up like in a little bit of a regression with the devil in that kind of way, because like at a certain point our passions do become what feels good to our body. Just very straightforward. So like I looked it up because I wanted to look at the US. I didn't look up the UK, but the US, the first time most people drink alcohol is 14. The first time people have like intake like inhalants is like 17, and then the average age of sex in the US is like 16. So I kind of felt like sex for the first time. So I felt like this kind of like all fit within the same realm of the devil of like, I'm going to kind of go what feels good to my body. And I'm going to rebel against social norms. I'm going to say, fuck all of you. And I'm kind of doing things at the age of 15 as like shock value. Like I have a lot of sophomores that I engage with, and like they say stuff and they do stuff solely for the fact of shocking you. And if that is not devil energy, I don't know what else is.
Yeah, I think that's fun. I think like, I suppose like on a personal level, I wasn't necessarily ever out to shock anyone. I was fucking just freewheeling through everything. I was just raw dogging life and desperately trying to find a way to just take the edge off that slightly. And that was my, like, I suppose like my like mental health stuff started to really kick in like 14, 15. And so I was protected from a lot of the various substances or whatever, because I was on prescription substances and I didn't want to be mixing those. But yeah, that kind of rebellion of but then also the chains element of like the restrictions and the things of where you are, things can feel in that very teenage way of things feeling very life and death, as things can feel very restrictive. And so that's the
Yeah.
age here where you're starting to choose your subjects. So for like, I suppose it's 14 really, but yeah, so 15, 16, you're doing your GCSEs, you've had to narrow down the subjects, and then you're going to have to narrow down your subjects even further for the next 2 years. And so you are really starting to choose the path that you're on in life.
Right.
And people really make a big deal about that, even though you are still a baby. And so I think the natural reaction to that is to be just panicking. And however that kind of manifests itself in your life, of that kind of more like devilish thing of like, oh God, okay, well, I'm having to make very adult choices, so I might as well start acting like what I think an adult acts like, which is, you know, drinking and shagging and whatever. Like, it's, yeah. Yeah, I
Oh,
might as well get some of the good bits.
yeah, no, I think that that totally makes sense from a logical point of view, because I mean, I just keep thinking with the devil, you know, we oftentimes get our kids to choose like what path they're going to be on, but when we tell kids to choose what path they're going to be on, we're also telling them to say goodbye to everything else, right?
Oh my
Through
God,
the
yeah.
very act of choosing something, you also are choosing that everything else is not going to be for you. And so I think that that is a really heavy thing that people don't take enough time to acknowledge, which is kind of like it leads similarly. I'm sorry if I'm going like a little bit fast, but I feel like all of this is more recent, but like it leads very similarly into the tower too. Because it's like, you know, for the tower, that would be for American school system, that's junior year, that's 11th grade year. This is when people choose their career. This is when people
Yeah.
choose whether or not they are going to stay in their hometown, because they choose what college they're going to go to. Usually 11th grade year, they
Whoa.
start applying to colleges. So like their literal home base is like completely burnt down, you know, because they have to make the decision of like, am I going to stick in this tower with my family, or am I going to leave this tower behind and go completely explore new things? I don't know.
Yeah, that's huge.
Fucking talent's huge.
Yeah, so like 16. So I turned 16 on my final exam, the day of my final exam of my GCSEs, which is where, I don't know what your equivalent would be, but it's like we do one set of like standardized, like big exams, and then we, at 16, and then we do another one in like 2 years' time at 18. And those are the ones that, so the ones at 16 dictate the subjects you can do for the next 2 years, and those subjects dictate whether you can go to university, what university you can go to, which courses you can do, all of that kind of stuff. And so I suppose we're kind of in the middle of that now, because when you chose your subjects back when you were 13, you still kind of had to have half an eye on what you wanted to do further down the line if you wanted to go to university. And so it's like I turned 16 when it was like really make or break for my academic career forever. And so I think a lot of people turn 16 then, and so that's right. Like that's massive. And just like, so I remember it so clearly, like walking out of that exam, and like it was June, so it's like, you know, it was really sunny, and walking home and just being like, fuck me, I'm 16. So for us, that's like you can legally have sex, and they're thinking about for voting, like they're thinking of bringing the voting age down to 16 here. But like, I think maybe you can enlist in the army, maybe? I can't remember. I don't know. There's like a couple of things that happen when you're 16 here. And just thinking like, this is, I'm too young for all of this, and yet also this is like the best day of my life.
Yeah,
I've just had my French exam, I've fucked off all my exams, I'm 16, I get to have a summer, and this is probably like the most freedom I'm going to have for like the next ever, is like the next 6 weeks. And so yeah, that kind of burn it
because
all down.
I think that that's so relevant to the tower, because it's like, I don't want to gloss over the tower. Like the tower fucking sucks. But at the same time, because it is such a definitive into a structure, there's nothing more liberating than the moments
Yeah.
after. It's fucking terrifying, but there's nothing more liberating than realizing, you know, okay, I've made these decisions. I've gotten all of these various things done, all of these choices. Now it's time for me to kind of relish in that and relish in that freedom, I think.
Yeah, and that kind of slightly, it's not really a clean slate, because like I say, it's that kind of all those building blocks of you've done these exams in order to go on to do those exams in order to go on to do those exams and stuff. But it's like those moments again, it's a lot about those kind of liminal spaces of between doing the exam and getting the results. It's like I've done everything I can at this point.
Yeah, there's literally,
Like
I can't
there's
exhaust
nothing
myself.
I can do, and so I might as well just, so what, I had like 2 months until I got the results. Just like I like never felt so free in all my life
Yeah.
before or since than those like 2 months of I can do nothing about my future, and that is kind of wild.
We have the ACT here in the US, like, well, in the southern part of the US, predominantly. The northern half uses the SAT. But essentially, it's two different tests that are, you really kind of take geographically, but it's for the same purpose of getting into a college. You can take it your final year of high school, which would be your senior year, but most people take it for the first time their junior year, which would be at 16. And a lot of times when they get back those first results and they see, for example, that they made like a 16, which is not an excellent score, or versus like a 29, which could get you into a lot of universities with like a lot of scholarships. There's a lot of finality to that because even though they technically still do have a year to continue taking it, it's like that first time they get the scores back, it is that kind of tower moment for a lot of people because for a lot of people it's like realizing like maybe it isn't achievable for me to try to go to Columbia University when I can't score higher than a 16 on the ACT. Like, and you're kind of reckoning with like these different paths in your future. And like in a sense too, I think for some people, this is kind of how I felt at 16. The tower is associated with the fire element. For me, and if I'm correct, is it Mars? Is it?
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
I thought for me, I wanted to burn it all down when I was 16.
yeah.
I hated the place that I grew up. I hated the people around me. And so I wanted that purification and the cleansing of that fire. I craved it so desperately to just kind of burn it down so that I could start over again. And I think that that's a feeling that a lot of 16-year-olds, because I work, now we're getting to the part where I really work with these kids.
Yeah.
I see that inside of them as they're making those choices. So
Yeah, I think also like the tower is it's a moment, and I think at that age it really does feel like things can just change in a moment in the way of like you don't have so much of a sense of kind of like the gradual build up to a catastrophe or something. It's just like suddenly it's so like I remember getting my exam results or something.
those results in.
And yeah, and you have them and you know now, or like
Yeah.
you finished your exam and you know now, and it's just like that. It's just suddenly things. Your
Clarity.
whole image of your future just changes immediately. So like my teachers, my attendance hadn't been like great because I'd had like mental health stuff, and so they'd really convinced me that like my results were going to be terrible. And then I opened my results and they were not terrible.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, this is my future. But then I moved schools, and then the baseline of what was like a good grade suddenly shot up. So like I'd done really well for the school I'd been at, some of the top results in like the whole school, and then I moved to a school where I was like slightly above average. And so again, it's just these moments of like your whole, it's like brain zaps of like what does my future look like? And it was like, or like my whole life people had been like, oh, you'll definitely go to like Oxford or Cambridge or whatever. And then I moved to school and I went to the like university person, and she was just like, with those grades, I don't think so. Change. And it's just those like the towers crashing and rebuilding before your eyes just all the time.
Okay, so the star, I guess. It's good to have some hope through this.
Yeah, I would have enjoyed a little bit more hope when I was 17. But so like this was the one that I struggled with the most a little bit, which is a little bit sad. I also struggle with the star card in general for like getting like squeezing all the juice out of it, I guess. I tend to end up a little bit kind of one note with like, hope and North Star and helping you figure out your direction and stuff. But that's I don't know. I should know more. I'm an Aquarius moon, so I should really eke more out of it. But
We both just kind of said a similar keyword. So for me with the star, I do tend to see a lot of about direction. Direction is my number one keyword for this card. And I think I teach this age group, and I have to tell you, like, there is a period of kind of like directionlessness, but a lot of times when they get those exam results in 11th grade, they have all of those tower moments. By the time they come to me in their 12th grade year, for the most part, they know where they're going and they know what they're doing. And now I think that the benefit, I teach college courses. So I'm teaching university level courses to kids that are still in high school. So I do teach the highest achievers in my school, which would make sense that they have like the sense of direction. I'm not saying that this is kind of like a universal experience, But I do think when you're faced with that tower moment, you know, it might take some time, but you kind of learn what is for you, but you also learn what is not for you. And you have more of a sense of direction than ever before in your life. And so I think through that, there's that sense of hope. You know, you've kind of been ripped raw, you've kind of been judged. So, you know, with the star card, the lady being completely naked,
Yeah,
you know, the kids
for
have gone through
sure.
so many years of like brutal standardized testing and judgments. And now they're like, well, this is what I am. You know, this is what I got on my ACT. This is what I got on my SAT. I kind of have to go from there. You know, they've been judged to the point to where like there's a sense of self-acceptance, I think, at that point of the only way to go is the path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like you're in the home stretch almost at that point. Like if you know what you're going to do. And so if you are going to university or you know what job you want to do or you want to move somewhere else or you want to go and do a gap year and you want to go travel or something, you know what it is and you're like counting down the days almost. I feel like at that point you're just like, yeah, I'm doing this bit now because I actually finally have a vision of what I'm working towards. And like I think everything's easier to do if you know what you're working towards. So whether that's actually going to like university, college or whatever, or it's something entirely different, you maybe have, I mean, even if that's just I'm getting the fuck out of school, like you know what you're working towards, and that I think is really helpful for a lot of people.
Feeling.
Yeah, and having more kind of autonomy, I guess, because that's this age. It's like with every year you get more and more control over your own life and sense of direction and stuff. So even though you've still got the pressures of your school and family and stuff, you are more able with every year to make your own decisions and find your own directions. And even if that means following what other people want, that's still kind of your choice at that point. And that is a cool part of that age. I can see what you mean, because also it's the age where you've picked your direction and you think maybe that is going to be a linear experience, that then maybe you check in a couple more years and you go, okay, it wasn't maybe as linear as I thought it was going to be. There was a few loop-de-loops and skip-de-bits, and so I'm actually in an entirely other arena. But at that age,
But at 17, your eyes like still on like that star, right? Like you still have that sense of like, I'm going to do this and it's going to work out and I'm going to graduate in 4 years and then I'm going to get a good job and then I'm going to get married and then I'm going to have kids and all of that stuff. Like there's kind of like, you still adhere a little bit to that prescription, whatever that might be. If that's a prescription that has been handed by others or one that you've chosen for yourself, like you still see that star and you're like, okay, there's a point to it. I can achieve that.
Yeah, I can navigate using that. Like I can make my decisions going forward a little bit easier, I think, than when you're a bit younger, because you know what you're working towards. That's a really cool way of looking at it. Yeah, I struggled with this one, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. For a moment we had some clarity and now the clouds have come back over and we're like, oh God.
So in the US, 18 would be when you can vote, when you can buy tobacco. You can't drink yet. You can sign up for the military. So there's a huge emphasis in the US on the age of 18. And I think with that new sense of freedom also comes like your awareness of like the dark underbelly of things. So like I went to a casino for the first time ever, like 2 weeks ago. And I was like shocked because I've never gambled. I'm 29. I just recently turned 29 and we went for my birthday. And like I went to a very nice casino, but I went on a Monday night. And so the crowd was quite seedy. It was like my first encounter with some of the dark underbelly of society. And I think when you kind of all of a sudden get access to places like casinos or in the case of like some countries, like 18 being like the drinking age, you're kind of like hit with like, oh shit, some people have some things that are motivating their behaviors that are kind of like underneath this water. And you get to kind of see like this crawfish or this lobster kind of like rising out. You kind of get to see like this side of people and this side of society, like the dark undercurrent.
You get to see the wolf as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think, yeah, so like 18 is the drinking age here. So that would be, even if you were perhaps, this is obviously not condoning it, obviously, but even if you were engaged in underage drinking, you probably weren't drinking in pubs or bars or anything. So you weren't you didn't see that. You didn't see like actual like nightlife culture. You were, for instance, this is definitely not from personal experience, drinking on a bandstand in the park at like 1 a.m. You definitely weren't doing that. But like it's a different perspective on, particularly here where we have a horrific drinking culture. You see a different side of people. And I think also there's an interesting thing when you're 18. Again, it's that, you know, you've gone from being big fish in a small pond and suddenly you're a little fish in the big pond of the adult world. And so, like, I see it now. You see 18-year-olds in pubs and you see, like, older men looking at 18-year-old girls in pubs and you just go, fucking babe, and it's a crash course in adult life of do not leave your drink unattended, do not, you know, all of these things that you just have to be aware of for the first time, and it gets real hazy.
Exactly. And especially if you're using substances for the first time in that capacity, right? Because
Gosh, yeah.
you know, I know that you can underage drink. I know you can underage use substances, but like at 18 years old, that's when you can fucking buy it, right? In many cases.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes your
encouraged.
usage exactly. Oftentimes your usage of these things goes up just by the inherent fact that you have easier access to it.
Yeah.
And so you quite are so right in the sense of like the substances themselves can make your vision very hazy and very confusing, difficult to kind of like muck through these situations, similarly to like what that would be.
Also, it's like if it's your first year at university as well, like there's a huge culture of what we call freshers, which is just like you're not eating properly, you're not sleeping properly, you're drinking more than you've ever drunk in your life, you've potentially are interacting with other substances that you've never interacted with in your life, you're thrown in with people you've never met in your life, and it's just a whirlwind of newness, and it's all a bit scary, and you're all a bit kind of undernourished and underslept, and you're all just in a fugue state for however many months, and then you're expected to go and learn things as well. There's a reason why most first years of universities like barely count towards your final grade, because you're just awash with new experiences and new people, and it's all just a mess.
Totally, absolutely. And I think that fits within the scope of the moon as well, because like you're also kind of being told like you're an adult now, so like you start to kind of see these like dark urges kind of come about. Like you start to realize the patterns of behavior that you are susceptible to falling into. And similarly to that lobster or that crawfish that is kind of climbing up, or that wolf, you kind of have to reconcile and say, woo, okay, this is what I'm really susceptible to. And you're not quite sure what to fucking do with it, but you're made aware of the murkiness that's within inside of you. And I think that's the first time that like you really kind of come into like brutal contact with, I can't let these undercurrent of like all of this water, like I can't let that unconscious side of me be the one that rules, because like I do have school to go to, and if you didn't go to university, you know, I have a job to go to. Some people start having kids around this age, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think also there's like, depending on your upbringing and your childhood and stuff, but for a lot of people, this is your first taste of the fullness of independence. So not living at home and stuff. So, you know, maybe you've lived at home with a parent or parents or something, or family, and you've gone out and you've done your independent things, and you've gone out and partied, or you've done whatever, but there's still been someone to do your laundry, or someone that's maybe cooked dinner, or there's been food that's been cooked that you can eat, or someone else does the grocery shopping and someone else pays the bills, and maybe you give some money towards it but you don't have to do the intricacies of the administrative tasks or something. But there's like an undercurrent of kind of emotional labour that's happened that maybe you weren't even aware of until suddenly it's gone, and you have to figure these things out by yourself, and you just feel totally blindfolded, and you're like, wait, people have been doing these things my whole life? And it's like, I just thought that, you know, clean socks just appeared, or that, you know, well-balanced meals and stocked fridges just kind of happened. It didn't occur to me that I would have to do all of these things whilst also having a job or doing my studies and doing these things. Like, suddenly I have to be responsible for this whole human body, and God, like you say, even potentially more than one human body at this point. And it's like, what a time. What a time. You realise how young you are.
And the flip side of that goes into the sun.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's amazing to have those two things. That's what makes that point in life so riveting, is that you go from something so severe to the moon to all the way up to the sun, and it feels like they exist on like opposite ends of the spectrum. And that way, in the same way, they kind of exist in the same place on the spectrum because they're both just really intense all the time. So the sun was the one I had a little hard of a time with the sun. So this was one that I have very sparse notes written down for. The only thing I really had thought of is like pride in self, because, you know, you have made it through some of that tumultuous period of being 18.
Yeah, and you've slightly more got your feet under you, I hope, by that point, and you have maybe, it's kind of like that, another flavour of like the tower moment of that sort of, you're on your way, things are feeling like a little bit clearer now, maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed for you. But then that's the thing with all of these things, as we've gone on through the journey, the difference in people's experience will be getting greater and greater, because we're not talking about like the sort of relatively set sequence of like child development. We're now just talking on people's lives, and so things are getting more and more disparate and experiences will be more and more different. But I also think about like a thing with the sun, and it's Sylvie from Tarot Magpie who talked about this, but about how like it can feel quite kind of exposed and quite sort of vulnerable to be like in that spotlight of the sun. And like that sense of when you're that age, it's like, oh, you're an adult now, you need to be able to stand kind of on your own 2 feet, in that kind of vulnerability of being like, oh, it's that moment when you realise that actually all adults are just making it up as they go along. Yeah, and it's like, oh God. You're just like, oh wait, there is no handbook. There is no guidebook. We are all just figuring this out. Shit. Okay. It's like kind of fake it till you make it moment, and you're just like, well, I'm going to put on a show then, get the jazz hands out.
That is a glorious description of the sun, the fake it till you make it. Because it's so ironic to me that like the sun is like associated with authenticity, but I've never seen it that way at all. Like it always just felt too bright, too much. It's like, why is there a big giant light glaring in my face? Like, what is that trying to expose? What is that trying to distract me from?
Yeah,
so that
and
makes
I
sense.
think it's like, you don't want to be totally like in that, like you need something kind of, you need some sort of, I guess I'm probably pulling from like the Leo sun connection thing of just, again, that strength, kind of the performance, the mask thing of, oh, we're all naked under our clothes and none of us know what we're doing, and so best foot forward, chaps, onwards, give it a go. But it's, but I like the idea that we're children again.
Yeah, I think it's very symbolic that we go back to being that child, because you realize that like all adults are just children and we're all just children all the time.
We're all just fucking up and trying to figure it out, that there is no handbook. And I swear every day I wake up a little bit angry about that. There is no handbook on how to human.
Not at all. You're going to have to make it your own.
Oof. Yeah. Oh, and then we've got Judgment.
My second favorite card. I tend to light box this one a little bit. And I think it's because I'm very fortunate in my life that when I knew that I wanted to become a teacher, I knew that I had a calling. So I really, truly tell people all the time that like, if I wasn't a teacher, I would still be a teacher. Like there's nothing that I can do in my life that is like not that, you know, and I think I've always had that clarity of purpose. And so for me, I think Judgment is really associated with that age of 20, because that's usually your junior year in college. So you're almost to your final year in college. You're right there. But a lot of times that's when you start getting into the specialization of your career. So your first 2 years in college are just kind of like general classes. But then that junior year, you really start to take classes that are related to your career, related to your subject field. And I think that that's easily equatable with that Judgment, because you start you hear that calling and you start to think about, how am I going to achieve this higher purpose out in the world? Like, what is my higher purpose? I'm being called to a higher purpose. How can I actually practice that higher purpose elsewhere? So I tend to have like a little bit of like a rosy view of this. I know some people tend to associate it like with the Judgment, like you're kind of being like judged for like your past actions and stuff like that. That's just never been what this card has meant to me. It's always been much lighter and much more about like a calling.
I love that. And I love that about your life and your calling. I think that's really, really beautiful. I think like my reading of the Judgment card is just generally like, I suppose, a bit different from that, but I will hold on to that because I think that's really beautiful. I think of Judgment as being kind of like a sibling with Justice, similar to the Hierophant and the High Priestess. So it's like, if Justice is like law and stuff coming from like without, judgment is like you've reached the point where like you have that sense within, so it's your own internal sense of like right and wrong, and
So
I think
post
that's
conditionality.
yeah, and I
Yes,
think
post
it's really
conditional
beautiful
morality.
for 20 and when you're, so you're no longer a teenager and you are maybe getting like a clearer sense of your beliefs and kind of your sense of the world because you've maybe had a little bit more experience actually out in the world now, and you have your ideas of what's right and wrong that maybe aren't your parents' beliefs, or things from other structures. You've had a little bit more of a chance hopefully to figure out your own internal sense of judgment, your own moral compass, what you think is right and wrong. And I think that works well, I suppose, for the 20-year-olds that I have known and the 20-year-old that I was. I think that fits for me. But I love the idea that if you have a higher calling, then that might sort of reveal itself around that sort of age. I think that's beautiful.
I think what you just said is beautiful because like I've always been very frustrated with the concept that like conventional morality is like very clearly depicted in justice, but I've never really had a card to illustrate beyond that post conventionality, you deciding for yourself and realizing and kind of waking up in a sense to the systems that kind of bind us and kind of oppress us. Like there is that element to understanding that systems at play are oftentimes what drive individuals to depict behavior which people consider like unsavory. Like if someone is really poor, like they might choose to steal. Like that, it's beyond just like what is the law and what is not. It goes into social justice. So I think that's like a really radical point of view, and I wrote that down. So thank you. Like I never have thought about judgment like that.
Oh yeah, no, I like that because I think like you, I needed a card to be about that, and so I decided it was this one. And like the idea that that's like an evolution of your, so you've met all of these in the Fool's Journey, you've met all of these people, you've been through all of these things, and so what do you get at the end of it? You get your own internal sense of what's right and wrong and what your values are and your priorities and your morals and your own personal code of ethics.
Yeah, your personal philosophy.
Yeah, exactly, your personal philosophy. And I think exactly, so yeah, like generally speaking, we believe that stealing is bad, but if the reason that someone is stealing is because they don't have enough to live, then which is the crime? The crime is that person doesn't have enough to live on. Like that's, and it's, so essentially it's like the evolution of the person. So they've met the Hierophant, they've met the Justice, they've met all of these things, and they've gone, okay, I take what you say on board, but also I'm going to figure out my own way of looking at things.
It's fucking beautiful. Our final one.
I know, the final
world
guy. Yeah. Which in the embodied ecosystems is interconnection. And
I love that.
That's beautiful. And it's what a 21. The bigger deal for you than it is for us over here.
Yeah, in the US you can do everything.
Yeah, that's you. You're an adult now.
You are an adult. And so it's very easy to say that like you're the pinnacle of being that adult. Because like 18 is like soft adult, but like like 21 is like, no, you're really like a fully fledged adult. So I think it makes sense in that way. And I think 21 was a large opportunity because that's the year that I graduated college, to be able to look back on the journey that had occurred. Of course, like, because I mean, both of us went to like post-education. I mean, I think that, oh, you didn't? Really?
No, my highest qualifications were at 16.
Okay. So good. I'm glad then, because I'm glad for that additional perspective, because I was kind of like, I think for me, like the world card makes sense because like that would be the year that like I graduated college. So I'm not sure what that frame of reference would be for other people who like didn't go to university, but for me it was kind of like taking a step back and just kind of like savoring in that moment and saying, okay, I have a degree, I have something tangible from this, which is very like earth-based in the world. Now what am I going to do with it? And you get to kind of relish in that moment of like celebrating before you immediately go. And especially for me as a teacher, because teaching, the school year starts in autumn, I did have like a summer after graduation where I said, I got this degree and now I have a whole summer to kind of relish in the fact that I've had it before I immediately jumped into work. And I know that's not something that everyone has, but it is that feeling of that world card for me.
No, I think that's perfect. I think that's really, really gorgeous. Like those last two cards, I think from your personal experience, they're really kind of anecdotally like perfect to go with them. I think like so I turned 21 in the middle of one of the worst breakups of my life
Yeah.
in the most toxic work environment I've ever worked in. And
Yeah.
when I was 21, I had my like big old, was it a mental breakdown? Was it a huge autistic burnout that meant that my entire life had to change?
Yeah.
So like I was essentially like another tower moment. But I quite like seeing it as that being the world because it was the end of that
Yeah.
first chapter of spikes of kind of tumultuousness, and then it has been essentially a whole other fool's journey since. And so it works quite nicely in a tarot framework for that to have
Yeah.
been when a whole bunch of doors or a whole bunch of chapters just kind of closed at once for me in that year.
Well, and that's
And
associated
then,
with it's associated with Saturn too, right?
yeah,
So if we're talking about like
yeah.
closure and restrictions and chapters ending, I feel like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and my life had to get real small all over again. And so it's like, as much as it's not like a fun, exciting thing, it's like my life wouldn't be what it is now if that hadn't happened. I would probably still be trudging away, making myself very, very unwell in like traditional working environments. I'd probably still be in like bad relationships and I'd just generally not be very well or very happy. But like all of this kind of came to a head around then, and it was that big something's got to give moment. And maybe that's why I'm not so great with the world. I'm always talking about like, okay, and now what? I'm always jumping ahead to the fool. I'm always not. I never give the world really its moment to have that, that summer of fucking enjoy it. You've worked really hard. You've done all of these things. You've met all these people. You've learned all this stuff. You've changed. You've grown. You've evolved. You've done like, give yourself some credit for it. I'm always like, and now what? But like, I think that I need to remember to give it its due as a part of the journey of that, like, yeah, that culmination point. And so, yeah, I'd be really interested to know what other people's lives were like when they turned 21 or the year that they were 21, because I think, like I said before, like, the further we've got from zero, the wider and wider the net has got of like what people's lives would be
Yeah.
looking like.
With
Yeah,
different
some people would
experience.
have kids at that age.
Right. And if you look at 21, you literally, it's like 2 plus 1, which is 3. Right. And so 3 inherently to me is like that sense of expansion. So it makes sense to me why you like kind of want to rush through that world card, because like if you even just look at the numerology, like it's all about kind of like with 3, like what's next, what's coming. And I think that's a beautiful part of like your early 20s is just no matter what, there always is kind of that sense of like what's next. And that kind of can bring joy, but that can also bring like fear, because like there also is a point for many people when they hit 21 years old and they're like, okay, is this it? Like what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Because people would have you believe that. There are so many people that would talk about like being a teenager as if that's the best years of your life. And I'm sure for some people they are. But like, I refuse to ever believe that the best years of my life are behind me. I think that's a terrible worldview to have. I think you've got to hope, surely, that things could be even better. Even if your life has already been great, you've got to hope that it's going to be even better.
No, totally.
Surely. But yeah. And there's always the people that like peaked at high school, and that's always funny. But that's just me being mean.
I had a high school teacher that told me when I was deeply depressed in high school that the high school was going to be the best years of my life. And I oftentimes engage in very authentic conversations with my students and tell them, no, that's just, no, it's just not the case. I mean, why would you prescribe your best years of your life being such a small part? Like, you get to 21 and it's 2 plus 1, like literally equals 3. Like there's so much more out there. And I think that's a message that desperately needs to be shared, is that like, relish in your accomplishments, relish where you came from with the world, but also always remember that like you can move forward and there are things that come after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because then you just, you start all over again with everything that you learned through all of this. You start all over again.
And that's the best part about tarot. Like, that's my favorite. That's the part that geeks me out the most, is that like, technically we started with the Fool, but the Fool is actually 0. So it's not
He's in all of them.
He's in all of them. He's literally in every single one of these cards. And so I think that's kind of beautiful too, to embrace that concept of like being brand new and innocent at every single stage of this journey, every single time we get to experience it. Because even if, like, say, for example, we've experienced a tower moment multiple times, we hadn't experienced that tower moment.
Oh gosh, yeah, they're all different. They're all different towers.
They're all different towers. And so we get to be the Fool throughout, no matter what.
Yeah, and we always get to learn something. Like, we're never You know, we're lifelong learners here in tarot world, and truthfully, all people are. It's just whether they're paying attention to it or not. And it's
Right.
just, yeah, every time you reach, you know, you may have met this person before in tarot world, but you'll learn something new every time. It's like rereading a favourite book. There'll be something that you find this time that you never noticed before because you as a person are different when you're approaching it. And
Totally.
yeah, it's very cool. But yeah, I love the cyclical nature and all the little journeys and stuff in tarot, and that's probably the stuff that I talk about the most during my readings with people, of being like, it's a journey. We're still, you know, we're just moving through it. Nothing is forever.
Yeah, one of my students told me that, and this is, I guess, the last thing I'll say, but one of my students told me that I taught him this year that the journey was more beautiful than the destination. And it was the greatest thing that I have ever been told in my life. You know, I think that it's true in case of all of this. Like, you know, we can kind of prescribe like these milestones to these particular moments in the life, but what we really need to do is make sure that we relish every stage of that journey. And I think the reverence for all of these ages kind of came out as we were talking about it. So they're also precious. Well, all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that was all 22 cards. We did it.
We did it. We did it. So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And so for anyone watching, thank you so much for riding this over 2 hour journey with us. If you see Imogen's name next to my name, it is going to be a long video. But I think it really did kind of feel to me like, I don't know, I was just talking to a friend. So I don't know, it just felt nice just to have this opportunity to chat with you. Like,
Yeah, it's been such a treat, and yeah, just getting to talk about all of these things and tying it into tarot, and yeah, it was gorgeous. Thank you so much.
well, thank you. And thank you to everybody else who was watching.